Hi. It's been a long time since I've done that voice.
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot. I said 10 minutes, and I managed to get here in 10 minutes, but I also realized my mic was still out, by the couch. And I was like, oh, shit. Move it all, reconnected, all that crap.
Yeah. Yeah. We're both a mess. That's fine.
Hey. Rude.
What?
No, I'm
the
joking.
The truth hurts.
Thanks, John.
Truth hurts. You're welcome.
Thank you for being my friend.
Thank you for being my friend.
Hello and welcome to Story Weavers, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything story related.
Here, we'll delve into inspiration, plot, structure, character, and dialogue. Be it in books, movies, music, comics, television, or anything else, we'll be covering it from conception to reception.
We'll be discussing between ourselves as well as with other creators and fans about their experiences, routines, and techniques. Join us and find your next inspiration. We're your hosts, Dean Bradley
and John William Worth.
And this is Story Weavers. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Story Weavers, the podcast where we talk anything and everything story-related. This week, we are going into our third book of the month. For January 2024, John and I, and hopefully some of you, read A Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers. It's a 2021 solar punk novel that was awarded the Hugo Award, I believe, in 2022.
Yep,
I know
2022, it won the Hugo.
Yeah. It was not Becky Chambers' first Hugo Award. Her other series, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember what the name of the series is, but the first one in the series is called A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet.
Small Angry Planet, yep.
That's a 4-book series, and that won the Hugo Award for book series when it concluded. So she has multiple Hugo Awards.
Overachiever.
Yeah. I have read A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and it's fantastic. It's quite a bit longer than Psalm for the Wild-Built, but still not terribly long. But it's kind of a space opera almost.
Okay.
Lots of fun alien races. Becky seems to have a very good grasp on identity. It's something she talks about a lot, and acceptance, for just being who you are, accepting other people for who they are. So let's get into it. I've now read Psalm for the Wild-Built twice. And you've read through it once. Do you want to give a brief kind of plot overview? Just so our listeners know, there will be spoilers in this, though, to be honest, there's not a whole lot to spoil in this book. It's not a plot-centric heavy book. It's just It's
very character-based and idea-based, which was perfect for the length of the book. It's about 160, 170 pages or so.
160 pages.
It's never once feels like it's never overstays its welcome, and none of the scenes ever go on for too long. It's perfectly paced for what it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, correct me if I get any of this wrong, because as we mentioned, it's not super plot heavy, and all of the plot elements are given in very organic ways. So a lot of it's left up to interpretation and kind of piecing it together. So sometime in the far future, humans have created robots and artificial intelligence that can rival their own. Basically, we've reached the singularity. And I'm not sure if there was an event that set in motion the separation between humans and machine.
I don't know if it was particularly mentioned, though. I mean, I think it's important to note the book does take place on a fictional moon called Panga. I realized that at the end. I thought it was a planet, but towards the end, it actually mentions that Panga is a moon revolving around a planet. But I don't know if there's any specific thing that happened. I think the robots just kind of, they were as sibling, or not sibling decks, as Speckled Mosscap, our robot in this story, says they knew they had a purpose, and they decided that working for the humans and doing what the humans wanted they didn't want that to be their purpose anymore, so they left. And I'll let you continue because going down that road is a long conversation.
Yep, because I was about to say we've already introduced one character. So basically, humans and robots come to an understanding to basically share the world, and they separate, recognizing that, okay, each of our species have our own paths to follow. Mm-hmm. So they do. I think it's like 50% of the world is for the robots and the other 50% is humans, basically.
Right. Something like that. And what's interesting about it is that like it was amicable, and the humans actually celebrate the robots having left, and they learn to adapt basically in a positive manner.
Mm-hmm. Which is the exact opposite of most science fiction novels, where there's a big conflict, like Terminator. There's the war of the machines, or like whenever you think of like the idea of the singularity, when machine learning outpaces human intelligence or it matches it. There's the idea that there's going to be this giant societal upheaval where like machines realize that humans are the real cancer, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Instead, this is a completely, as you said, amicable and totally understanding, totally peaceful. And that's kind of like the tone of the book, is just a very calm vibe the whole time. Again, it's based more on ideas. And basically the story follows Dex, who is a non-binary person. What's their occupation at the beginning of the book? Because they're not satisfied by it.
I don't know if it mentions what their occupation actually is. I think they just work for a company.
Yeah, and then
but I don't know if it ever specifies what it is. Yeah,
they decide to go off and become a
tea monk.
A tea monk, that's the name, where they basically serve tea to people throughout Panga, and they also act as almost like therapists. They listen to people, they listen to their troubles, and they let them. They customize the tea, and they kind of like milk the tears out of people to get rid of their pain or trauma, which I found very interesting.
Oh, I absolutely love that. That's something we're definitely going to talk about too.
It's like it's like a literal safe space where it's like you come in, there's cushions, there's nice lighting, there's nice smells, there's wonderful tea, and then someone who just listens to you, whatever it is, almost like a priest in confession, except they have yummy tea.
Right, and one thing to notice about that too is I don't know if there's ever any mention of like money or currency in the novel. Like it's never really mentioned whether people give him money for this service. He just shows up in these towns and gives people tea and kind of becomes a shoulder to lean on, when people need it.
I never noticed that till now, until you brought it up, but that is a good point. There's no economy in this world, or if there is an economy, rather, it's all based on trading like emotions and feelings and services.
Right,
rather,
but it's not explicit.
Right, it's more based on making people feel good and making people happy, and that seems to be the case with the book. And then at some point, sibling Dex, once again, feels dissatisfied with their livelihood. Or I think it's like, what is it, crickets?
Yeah, I think
crickets compels them.
Yes. It's like, or the lack of crickets, basically.
Right, which I find interesting, because one of the things I miss, having moved from the Northeast out to here, Arizona, I miss what we call peep frogs.
Oh,
Chirping frogs. I miss those so much because we don't have them here. And even crickets, you don't hear them that much here because there's no grass. But at some point, they're compelled to go find crickets at an ancient temple, I believe, in the wooded areas where the machines live, the robots live. And during their travels, they encounter a robot named Moscap. And
specifically speckled Moscap.
Speckled, yes.
Yeah, they call themselves Moscap, but their full name is Speckled Moscap.
It calls itself Moscap.
Oh, you're right. It calls
so that's another interesting element, which we'll get into in a bit, is just as Dex is non-binary, Moscap identifies as it. And they actually have a very brief conversation about it when they first meet each other, about why they. But anyway, Dex is hesitant at first because they want to go on their journey. They don't want baggage, and Moscap wants to experience the world. He says, "Oh, you're a human, perfect." And robots have an even more laid back way of living than humans do. Yep, like they'll spend years or decades watching a frog in a river,
or watching a stalagmite form.
Yep, but they go on this journey, and on the way to this temple, they encounter a bear, which again, because of the novel, there's no stress to the situation. Like that's the closest thing to an action scene that there is in the whole book.
Yeah.
And basically the whole book is just Moscap and Dex having philosophical conversations about identity and just
life,
where their places are in the universe. And I like one of the things, because I read the book on Kindle, so I always like to highlight like nice quotes.
Yeah, I did the same.
And this book, for 170 pages, I got a lot of good quotes from it.
Yeah,
like just really insightful and intelligent conversations.
Yeah, Becky seems to have a very good grasp on just finding ways to enjoy the simple things in life. It's almost the book. It almost sometimes reads like a self-help book, except it doesn't read like a self-help book, if that makes any sense. But there's so much good information on just about life and, you know, trying to accept things for the way they are and find ways to be happy in the moment. There's a long passage at the end about purpose and what our purpose is as people versus what Moscap's purpose is as a robot. And it basically being very existential. There is no purpose, but because there's no purpose, that is the reason to enjoy every moment you have, regardless of what's going on in your life. Because there's no purpose, you are here experiencing life, basically.
Right. That's actually something, because one of the things you wrote down about existentialism, but also just accepting that life happens and to just enjoy it and go with it and have hope.
Right.
I might have referenced this in another one of our episodes. There was a video by a YouTuber. He talks about cinema a lot, and he was talking about the different movements of movies: modernism, postmodernism, and post-postmodernism.
So this is from my curiosity. So I don't know what the difference between postmodernism and post-postmodernism is. You've mentioned those phrases before, but I don't know them, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners don't. Not to go down a tangent, but do you mind doing like a brief explanation of those?
I will appease.
Thank you.
So modernism from the 50s to the 60s was where you could also apply it to literature as well to an extent. Was when you started getting more morally gray characters and you started getting more realistic depictions. Like the example the YouTuber used was like the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is a great film where you don't exactly know what's going on until the very end. And then it makes you question, okay, what is a hero? You know, there's a clear villain, but who is a hero?
Right.
It's a John Wayne film with Jimmy Stewart and Vivian Lee.
Okay. I've never heard of it, but I know all the actors.
I love the song too. And then what was it? Then postmodernism came afterwards, where they're evaluating like what cinema is. And it took a much colder and much more evaluative, if that's a word, look at cinema and the form and where your place is in the form. And like a good example would be Orson Welles with F for Fake.
I was actually going to ask if Welles was part of that movement. And I assumed yes.
That movie was basically him tearing down the set pieces on the film and saying like, look at the artifice. You also get to an extent like Scream, where it's very meta, very self-referential. Again, the characters aren't super warm and you don't feel close, but they're entertaining in a kind of like a smart, like haha sort of way.
Okay.
Whereas postmodernism, they compared it with the film Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Okay.
And the one quote, I haven't seen the film yet, but I really want to. The one quote from the video that has stuck with me was that, you know, existentialism is basically there is no hope, almost.
Is that yes and no. Yes and no.
Okay. Yeah, but it's like, the idea of there is no hope.
Closer to like nihilism than existentialism.
But the whole point is because nothing matters, everything matters.
Right. Exactly.
So that's almost like that's almost like what I feel like with this book. It's like, okay. And at some point, Dex and Moscap have a conversation about that. I think towards the end, like, what's the point? And Moscap's like, you just keep going.
Right.
Life is there to experience. Just because you missed one experience or you missed something doesn't mean it just stops.
Right.
And it's that idea of just kind of like that endless feeling of hope, like you never question just keep going, you know?
Well, I think part of it too is just that so many of the popular and well-known books that are read on existentialism, like I just finished reading Franz Kafka's The Trial. What was the other existential book that I had just read?
Metamorphosis?
I had read Metamorphosis in high school and earlier this year. I'm trying to remember. Okay. There was another existential book that I had also just read. But anyways, I've been reading existentialist books a lot lately, and so I definitely picked it up in this one, but it's so different because when people think of existentialism in reference to those authors, it's usually, I read Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, which is it's an essay on kind of like the purpose of life and the concept of suicide and what would drive someone to end their own life, basically. Right. It's very, very philosophical, but basically existentialism, a lot of people associate it with being very negative and very empty. And Kafka's works, I think, are definitely like that.
Yes.
But if you read Myth of Sisyphus or something like this, I mean, I think existentialism kind of at its core is the idea that there is no purpose, there is no greater power or higher meaning to life. But just the fact that we're here and we made it over billions of years, this collection of atoms was able to come together on this planet and evolve, and we became beings who can think, who can say, I think, therefore I am, you know. And that is something to celebrate and enjoy, the good parts of it, the bad parts of it, just going through the experiences. And I think that's a lot of what existentialism is. And I think Becky Chambers takes that and looks at the positive side of things. That is one thing. This book focuses on the positive a lot.
It's very positive. Like I said,
while also being aware of the negative.
Right. Which, you know, the character at the end, Dex, does become very confounded or like depressed over something. But the moment passes in one, a logical sense. And two, it's just Moscap saying, but you're still here.
Right.
You're still alive. You're still all right. And that's actually another thing, like, because in the book, there is a religion. It's very loose. Like, they never describe the ins and outs of it per se, but there is a religion.
Right. And they do describe some of the gods and like their purposes.
And like how you've written down too, and it is a good point, while there is a religion and we think of like organized religion as like community and worship and everything, it's also based very much on the individual and still community, but it's not as much about worshiping. You know what I mean? It's more about like each other, your peers.
Yeah, and I think they like it's not explicitly stated, but I kind of got this feeling that religion in this novel and the gods in this novel, they're not literal gods or they're not literal beings. They're basically ideas.
Representations.
Yes, the representations, they're ideas that people give thanks for and are appreciative of. But the gods don't directly influence their lives other than basically reminding them that you have to make your own life and you have to find your own happiness and you have to find your own way.
Right. Which I find to be a wonderful idea, because how you just mentioned, this is a bit of like a personal thing, but like how you mentioned the idea that over billions or trillions of years, the universe was created or the Big Bang, whatever the happening was, and that we came to exist through a complete random occurrence of just atoms and carbon coming together. The other day I was at lunch at work and two teenagers came up to me and I thought they just wanted to borrow the chair, but then they sat down, they tried to talk to me about like Catholicism and Jesus, and they were trying to like, I guess, recruit me.
Yeah.
And I mentioned that to them and I told them I love that, because I was almost done with lunch and I was like, why not? I'll have this conversation.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be rude, but it's like I had this conversation with them and I told them I find something so almost romantic, but just wonderful about that idea that we are here by pure chance, and why squander that? Like, the chances of us having existed are so infinitesimally small. The idea that you would just say, well, it could happen again. It could happen. It's like, no, value it, because the scene from Watchmen, where Dr. Manhattan's talking about out of all the permutations in the universe, you exist.
Mm-hmm.
That's a gift.
Right.
Besides any religion, besides anything, you exist.
Right.
And, the people I was speaking to had so much trouble understanding that, so much. But it's like...
No, finish what you were saying.
But no, it's like that's something that this book, spends its length kind of discussing, is like that value of you're here. Mm-hmm. You could have been someone else, another, can I say sperm on this episode?
Sure.
Another sperm could have impregnated the egg and you would be someone completely different, but you're you, like sibling Dex, you're you. Value that.
Yeah.
So
it's a conversation me and a friend of mine, Carl, he's the vocalist and lyricist for Dead City Crown. Carl.
Yep.
He's a lyricist and vocalist for Dead City Crown. And we talk about kind of that identity, and we talk about religion a lot. And one of the songs on their latest album is called I Am a God. And it is that concept. It's the idea that, everyone, exactly, everyone, or a lot of people are looking for some outside inspiration or some outside reason to, why are we here? But the whole concept basically being like, you are your own God. You're the only one that's ever going to experience the world the way you do.
Yes.
You're the only one that's going to see the perspectives you do from your experiences, from your brain chemistry and things like that. And just like accepting that. And there's a lot of comfort and solace in something like that.
Like the tea monks. Tea monks, how they shared. It's all about what is your view? What is your experience? Because you want to feel close to that person.
That's part of the reason. That's part of the reason that sibling Dex chose to leave the city is, they felt like they had no purpose. They at one point, I don't know if I have the quote here or not, but they basically say, like, I should be happy. I have a roof over my head. I have a job. I have friends. I drink. I have sex. I do all of these things. But every morning when I wake up, it's just a drag. And I know I should be happy, but I'm not. And so they decide to do something about it. And the thing they choose to do is the life of a tea monk, which he got this idea when he was younger. I apologize to everyone. I keep saying he. When they were younger, their dad took them to a monastery with monks who just taught them ways of the simple life, basically, and they were so entranced by that concept and the way that these monks didn't make them feel like a child and didn't make them feel inferior, but treated them as people and as humans. And I think they really take that when they move on to be a tea monk. And I think part of the reason they never felt satisfied was because the reason they were doing it was partly selfish, to feel the satisfaction of helping other people instead of just the selfless helping others.
Right. The kindness versus niceness, if you will. Like niceness is obligation. Kindness is you're legitimately wanting to help without the expectation of thanks.
Right. And I think there was, I think they definitely do genuinely want to help people. But they also, I think another big part of the novel is that, like, we don't have to go through life alone.
Right.
It's okay to rely on other people to some extent. We do live in a community, we do live in a society, and sibling Dex finds out that even when they try to leave and go away, they still end up, with someone.
Moscap, yep.
Yeah, they end up with Moscap, and they try and reject being friends because they feel like they have to go through life on their own.
Right.
And it's just this idea that you don't.
Right. Well, because we live in a society. And I wanted to say that.
Yeah. I say that all the time.
It's like humans are inherently social creatures. To rope one of us off, like, in The Sims, locking you in a room, it's like, what happens? You die. I think we all did that. So
put him in the pool and take away the ladder.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So, don't teach them how to cook, have them make a 4-course meal, watch them burn. We're all sick people.
Early 2000s gaming.
Oh, yes, I played that way too much. But no, like humans are inherently social creatures. And that is another good point you make about the book. It's like how Dex feels the need to do this on his own. So he's rejecting what he embraced earlier as a tea monk. It's like taking in other people's experiences. Mm-hmm. He wants to experience himself, but what happens with Moscap when he comes in? Moscap wants to share that experience and understand, except it's not a human, it's a machine. Mm-hmm. And I almost wonder, like, okay, in this world, like, does Dex have some sort of thing in the back of their head saying, this isn't human, this is weird or something, or are they accepting and they just want this experience for themselves? That kind of selfishness. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think they're pretty accepting of it. But it's also one of those things where, you know, their education when sibling Dex was growing up, they were taught about the history of the robots, and they were taught, you know, about the Exodus, for lack of a better term, and why it happened, and, you know, and what they're doing. And Moscap also, again, they didn't really learn. They were programmed with certain information. Mm-hmm. And so it's like when they come together, you know, you can read as much as you want about people or events in history, but actually speaking to someone who experienced it, but like meeting them firsthand, basically, like their ideas of each other were kind of turned upside down. Yes. They assumed things just based on, you know, on what they had been told, just to find out that it wasn't like that necessarily.
Which is almost representative of, say, you pluck someone out of a small town and you drop them into another city somewhere where they start meeting people of other cultures. It's like other backgrounds. It's like the things those people do, they're not wrong. It's just different. And you get like this resistance oftentimes to anything different.
Yes.
But I think it's John Waters. He's a famous film director. He said you can't be racist and travel extensively. And to an extent, I agree. Mm-hmm. But basically it is. Once you start meeting people outside of your little social bubble, which is what happens here, it's almost like you're forced to accept, like,
the world is not just your narrow vision of it.
Exactly. Even the little differences you see in your community that you think, oh, well, that's as far as it goes. No, it can go so much further.
Right.
And it's just accepting that. It's just cultural differences. One thing about the novel, because of how, like we just described, like people like accepting each other, being sometimes overly empathic. Is that the word? Like understanding and wanting to share.
Yes.
Some people would hate that idea and they would possibly call it dystopian, almost like where there's just like that, you know, almost to an extent communism, if you want, like that absolute sharing of resources, not resources in this case, but like of emotions. And, you know, like how you said, there's no economy. Some people will call that dystopian, others utopia.
Right. It's all, again, it's context.
It's context and it's perspective too, because it brings into like two novels that were written around the same time, I think, that are complete polar opposites, 1984 and Brave New World. Have you read both of them?
Yes, I have read. I read them both in high school, and I have read both of them since as well.
Yep. One of them, I forget the exact terminology, but like 1984 is a dystopian novel. Brave New World is a utopian because everyone's happy. You take drugs to be happy. Everyone's happy, but they're still very grim.
But I feel like Brave New World is it's a dystopian vision of a utopia. It basically, I feel like Brave New World basically says like, this is the recipe for a utopia and it still won't work.
Yep. The irony, because the word utopia came from, I think it was, Thomas More. I have the book over there. He wrote a philosophical novel in, like, I think the 1500s called Utopia. Okay. And I think part of it was supposed to be almost like a satire. Like, this is the perfect society, but it's inherently like, it can never exist. That absolute perfection.
I always kind of relate. It's interesting. I've done a lot of reading recently just on like the the evolution of human civilization and of cultures and of people, and just kind of this idea. I kind of look at it almost scientifically sometime, and you look at like Newton's laws. I think it's Newton's laws, and Gravity. The one that basically says whatever. Maybe it was Faraday. I don't know, but one of the laws of physics that basically says, you know, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Energy can't be created or destroyed. It's basically just transferred. And so I see that a lot when I look at human civilization and human culture over the years, that when there is a push for one thing, even if it's for something better, somewhere there's going to be a negative push resisting it. Kind of thing. And so I think that's, you know, it's not physics, but there are so many things about like the physical world and chemistry that can be applied to broader systems such as humanity. Which, if that makes sense.
That does, because there's always going to be a resistance to any sort of progression or societal improvement, because some people, it's good the way it is. Right. Why do we have to move?
But even the same kind of way, when something starts to decay, you know, when a body decays, there are life, you know, I think Moscap even brings this up to Sibling Dex. When you die and your body decays, like it's well, you're not sad because you're dead, but it's sad for others that your life is over.
Dead.
But there are all of these other organisms and all of this other life that are living and sustaining themselves because of you.
Have you ever heard of a whale fall?
No.
So it's kind of the same thing, except for whales. So when whales die, they obviously sink to the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
And it's very rare that scientists see it, but basically because whales are, you know, huge and they've got all the fat, they've got the blubber, they've got all the meat and everything. Living organisms that live on the bottom of the ocean will like swarm to the whale fall. And what you'll see, like there was a video I saw a while back, but then I saw one on TikTok recently of some deep sea divers who found just the skeletal remains of a whale. And there was all this algae, plant life. There were fish swimming around it. And it was grim because obviously they're bones, but it was also beautiful because it's like from death there comes life. Again, that transference of life energy, if you will.
Yeah.
Of, you know, one creature dies, but look at the life that came from it. It's like we still live on in that regard.
There's a great, we're definitely going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but I like it. But there's this great song I like by a Finnish band called Amorphis. And a lot of their songs are based on the Finnish tale of the Kalevala, which is kind of like their creation story, their creation myth.
Yes.
Kind of like the Norse gods. It's a mythos. And a lot of their songs are based on that, but they have this song called The Bee. And there's a lot of really cool imagery in it, but it's basically the idea that you have this old skull of a king in a landscape somewhere, but it's now home to a hive of bees, you know, and it's basically this idea that it was once this great person, but now, you know, now it houses, you know, insects. And that's still a beautiful thing.
Well, it's like the image that I've always had, again, one of my like big brain moments sometimes where I like, whoop, and then I come back, is this concept of we're in the 21st century. We're supposedly so advanced and everything. But then you see extreme weather formations come through, earthquakes or volcanoes. And you're just reminded it's like we're not terribly much better oftentimes than we were during barbaric times or like the medieval times. It's like we're still running around, running from Mother Nature, running from each other.
Between human communities, I think it is better, even as grim as things are in a lot of respects. That is definitely better, but nature's not going to stop.
No, but it just always reminds you, it's like, look, as important as you might be, you know, like the ruler of a country, a very wealthy person, your bones are just as white, just as plain as everyone else's when you're dead. You know, it's like that concept. So one thing, actually, just to
bring us back.
Because humans celebrating freeing the robots again, which, like we mentioned earlier, is an interesting concept because in most sci-fi novels where there's such a relationship, it's usually like fighting and war and all this stuff. It's very antagonistic.
Mm-hmm.
In this book, the humans and robots come to an amicable agreement and go their separate ways. One of the things I thought of was sometimes, do you ever think the humans are almost like patting themselves on the back, like, good job, we did good?
Yes and no. I don't think so. I mean, honestly, we really don't get a look into the lives of any other humans in the novel. The novel is almost explicitly focused on sibling Dex and Speckled Mosscap.
Yep.
But to your point, I think this is a good place to mention. So the reason that Becky wrote A Psalm for the Wild-Built was after the success of her previous series. Yeah, Small Angry Planet and the subsequent novels. After that success, they were the subgenre of science fiction called solar punk had been gaining some popularity, and Tor Books, who is the same publisher that published the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan
and Brandon Sanderson,
right? Which I've read and you've currently read, and we have discussions
reading
of a lot. Reading, yes, you're right.
Book 6,
yeah. So they commissioned her to write 2 solar punk novels, with her success, and so the reason she wrote them, there definitely was a purpose to. I think, the robots and the humans split being amicable, because I was looking into it. So when I was after I'd read the book, I was reading some reviews on it, and I had never heard the term solar punk before. So I looked into it, and it's similar to like cyberpunk or steampunk, except that it's much more focused on sustainable and ecological living with the earth. It rejects this notion of climate doomerism that the human race is doomed to fail because of the climate, and just this idea that like we have the knowledge and know-how and resources to build sustainable environments. And so I think this is just this. It was kind of her way of showing that, like, yes, we're moving into an age of artificial intelligence and machines. And while this probably isn't what's going to happen with us, she's showing an option of what it would look like, if maybe because it's interesting. The community, like, they leave robots behind, but there's still electricity and there's still technology and there's still modernism in their culture and in their cities.
And that technology isn't all encompassing. It's not like
Correct.
Those movies. It's not like, oh, you sit in your chair, you put on your headset, and that's you for 24 hours. No, it's like computers are only mentioned once or twice, like during the T-Monk scenes where it's like they like tap each other to give each other like good vibes or something.
Right, yeah, like their version of social media.
Yeah, basically, which is brought up so little. It reminded me of the Dune series, where one of the things that makes that series unique, one of many, is that there's no computers, there's no thinking machines, because of like an event called the Bulgarian Jihad, but it immediately makes it much more about the humans.
Right.
And that's like how you were talking about like the solar punk and like the kind of like going against the climate doomerism, I think you're called.
Yeah.
And it becomes much more about the human instead of like human created systems, like, it's rejecting the current state of like capitalism or different governmental systems. It's like going back to much more simple human based and emotion based, relationship based systems.
And one of the things that this book reminded me of, and it's something that I try to remind myself of frequently, especially, I mean, you wake up in the morning, you get on social media, I forget the name of the comedian, but there's a comedian that's like, oh, yep, just woke up, ready to have a great day, open my phone. Do you want to watch a video of someone being murdered in war? Nope, but there it is right on your home screen. Yeah. You wake up and you have notifications from, for me, it's like the New York Times, it's from social media, it's all of the things that are going on. And sometimes it's so important for your mental health to remember that, like, while those things are important to be aware of, you have your own life that you're living. You have your own world that you're living in. You have your own people around you that you are supporting and are helping support you to move through life together. Yes. And as big as all of these world problems are, something that this book reminded is, it's 160 pages focused on 2 characters.
Yes. Which is, I love when stories do that, when they zero in on a very small group of characters, and technically a small setting too. It's always like around Dex's what is it, the
ox
thing
bike.
that he rides,
ox bike, which is basically it's basically a bike with like a wagon cart behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's the other thing, like imagining the setting of the novel. It's like I kept imagining, like you had mentioned the other day, what are they called? Earth ships.
Yes.
That is literally what I was seeing in my head when I was reading this. And like they were talking about the cities, it was just like bigger Earth ships.
Yeah.
Like sustainable homes, sustainable buildings that are made out of the natural world rather than constructed per se.
Right.
Only constructed when it was like needed to be done.
Yeah. So that was one of the things I had never heard the term before until I was kind of like looking into the solar punk genre and the solar punk movement, the artistic and literary movement, and this concept of Earth ships, which are these like fully sustainable homes that are being designed in places all over the world, including the U.S. The U.S. I know I read somewhere that there are some that are they're in like northern New Mexico. There are some governments around the world that like won't give permits for the building because the concept is they're not relying on public utilities. They're not relying on fossil fuels.
There's no money.
Right, exactly. But it's just the idea that like kind of going back to, people think of like I think older times were happier when we were just hunter-gatherers. But I feel like those were probably terrifying times because people would just come up and kill you in your sleep for no reason.
Right. What Psalm for the Wild Built strikes, which some would say is unbelievable. Like even I would say that based on human behavior, especially in my lifetime, but it's like the ideal. Humans learn to get along and kind of like put aside their differences, which is once again why at the beginning of the video, I wondered if there was any mention of an event, like something happening that kind of like told humans like, hey, you're going to destroy yourselves.
Maybe it's mentioned in the second book because I don't know if we did mention like
in a way. I hope it isn't. Almost,
I agree, but this is part one. The second part is called A Prayer for the Crown Shy, which I own but have not read yet. But it is on my list.
Right. Speaking of like the title, like think of Psalm for the Wild Built because it makes no sense until you read the book.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what you think because I had never really. Given the title of the book much thought.
But I was just thinking of the term wild built because that applies to the character of Moscap, who is, I think, a 6th generation robot. And basically what they say is there was the original generation that was there during the separation of humans and robots, and that they basically just run down. And eventually their parts are reused into different robots and parts of their personalities continue onward. I don't think their whole personalities, but parts of them.
No, it's basically like, once a robot decays or stops working, other robots break them down and collect other parts from other robots and rebuild them. And that's the new generation of robots.
And Moscap has like voices in his head, in its head, to, that I talk about previous existences, previous lives. And, I don't like reading metaphor necessarily into stories because sometimes stories just are there.
Right.
But I think of the Wild Build almost as like, you could almost look at them as like children of immigrants almost, or children of travelers who, their families are not from that place, but they are because they were made there. Or, born there.
Born, grew up, raised, however you want to say it. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's, because it's like Moscap is saying there is that connection to that original moment of separation. Right. But there also isn't. Like, I have nothing to do with it. I wasn't there. You can't ask me about it.
Yeah.
So that's what I just thought of. And in terms of the word psalm. I'm not a religious person, so I'm not exactly sure what psalm means. Is that
a psalm? It's kind of like a poem, a song, a hymn. But psalms. But in addition to that, they typically are almost fable-like in the sense that they typically have like a lesson to be learned.
And this definitely feels like a fable.
Yeah,
definitely.
Hey guys, Dean here. Hope everyone enjoyed A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers as much as John and I did, and I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. The February 2024 Story Weavers Book of the Month is going to be The History of Love by Nicole Krauss. This is a 2005 fiction novel that has been recommended to me by multiple people, and I've been told it is one of their all-time favorite books. We hope you'll join John and myself in reading The History of Love by Nicole Krauss this month, and join us at the end of the month for the episode. Now back to Psalm for the Wild Built.
So one thing, I think a bit of an elephant in the room to an extent, even though it's not really addressed in the book, but I'm sure our listeners have noticed it, is the gender and the identities of the two characters who we speak about, Dex and Moscap.
Yes.
So as we mentioned, Dex is non-binary, so they, them, and Moscap identifies very specifically as it. Right. And it's never really brought up why each of these characters identifies that way in the book.
It is, but it's very brief. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the point. If you read A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, that's also something that's brought up a lot, because in that novel, it takes place on a spaceship with multiple different alien kind of humanoid species, intelligent species, that all have different cultures, all have different ways of expressing love or friendship and thinking about family and things like that. And so I know Becky herself is openly part of the LGBTQ community. She lives with her wife in Northern California. They traveled the world for a little while, I believe. But I think the whole concept is that everyone's always talking. They make such a big deal about the pronouns and being accepted, and I think sometimes that's what frustrates people who are not part of the community, or maybe not as accepting of the community, is all of this focus on that. And I think Becky's kind of rejecting that a little bit, and pushing against it, and just trying to say, like, it's just about being a person. It's just about accepting someone for who they are. It doesn't matter what they identify as. It doesn't matter who they love. Like, they're just people going through life like everyone else is.
Right. I mean, Dex isn't even given like an introduction to explain like why they are they. Like,
they're just called sibling Dex. Exactly. Like that's their title.
And their pronouns are they, them. It's never explained because it's never needed.
Right.
I also found it, because I thought of it on a mechanical sense too, because Dex is never given any physical descriptions.
Nope, not at all.
You're never even aware of what their sex is, because gender, sex,
right? Yeah, you don't know that. You don't know how long their hair is or how tall they are. You know that they're like in their early mid-30s. I think that's mentioned.
Right. I actually thought until then, I thought like 20s. I thought they were like wicked young.
Right.
Too.
Yeah.
But no, like at a mechanical sense, I was thinking it makes it so much easier for the reader to fall into it. Because one of the things I found myself doing sometimes was assuming masculine traits in my head.
I did as well. Yeah. And I'm curious if female readers see it the other way. To me, though, part of it too is the name Dex. I think Dexter. Dexter's typically a guy's name. So I think that's part of where it came from for me. But also at the same time, like, there was a lot of myself and my own insecurities that I saw in this character. And so I think I naturally related to it as a he because of that.
Yep.
But I think that's also one of the great things about the fact that it's not a he or a she, is it makes the character that much more relatable to everybody.
Right. I mean, there's a quote that I'll reference in a minute that I've wanted to bring up that kind of I felt it was like early in the book, but again, because like I kept reading decks and I kept assigning. I never necessarily thought he, except for like once or twice. And even then, it would make me kind of stop and shake my head and go, now, why would I do that? Like, it made me question, like, okay, am I seeing myself in this character? Because it's not like Dex doesn't have a personality. He does. Oh, yeah. I mean, they do. They do. See, I'm doing it.
They do. And I love the like little moments where like they get angry. You know, they'll just be randomly like, fuck, or this is bullshit.
Yep. Which is something else I love about the book, because at least when I was growing up, there was always this concept: a book can either be for adults or for children. You can't have it both ways. And then here's a book that, you know, a teenager could read and generally understand, but that it had like fuck in it. It had mention of sex in it, and it straddled that line, and it said, no, people can read whatever. People can be ready for whatever at any age. There's no like strict empty space. You know what I mean?
Right.
But, but no, I think like, you know, yes, Becky Chambers was making a statement about like the whole gender politics thing, but I think that wasn't like the biggest point of it. I think it was the reader could slip into Dex in a way. Cause again, like I would be reading it and they, and then all of a sudden he.
Yeah.
And again, at least for me, it made me stop and say, why? Because I know psychologically, so when you're explaining something to someone and you create like a hypothetical person to explain that concept, you immediately assume your own identity to that hypothetical person. So like a woman would say she, a man would say he. And that's why oftentimes you'll see books where it's like, it's written by a man, like in Wheel of Time. Egwene will explain something and she'll say, well, he would do this. He should do this. But it's like, it's a woman speaking. So she should be saying she would do this.
Or you would expect her to say that.
Exactly. But again, like masculine world, feminine world, even though Wheel of Time is whatever. But it's like, I kind of liked thinking about that. It's like, it's almost like Becky Chambers was like kind of reaching out almost from the book in some really smart way, and almost like pulling you in and saying, no, like think about this, because the book's all about ideas. Think about this. And then just one last that quote that I wanted to share. Or not share, but it's like, should I say it? I don't know. But it's like early on in the book, Dex is talking about like nobody in the world knows where I am right now. They thought
I highlighted that one.
Filled them with bubbling excitement. They had canceled their life, bailed out on a whim. The person they knew themselves to be should have been rattled, but someone else was at the helm now. Someone rebellious.
Can I finish the rest of it? Because I have it quoted here.
Yes.
Someone rebellious and reckless, someone who had picked a direction and gone for it as if it were of no more import than choosing a sandwich. Dex didn't know who they were in that moment. Perhaps that was why they were smiling.
Yep. It was.
I love that passage.
Yeah. And at least for me, because it felt like ever since COVID and, you know, got laid off, moved across the country, doing different things, writing and doing the podcast and everything, that's almost what it felt like. It felt like, I mean, it was kind of forced upon at least me to an extent, but it's also like, no, now I'm choosing which direction to face it.
Right.
And it does feel sort of rebellious because the world tells you like, no, do this, do this, do this. And then it's like, no, I want to do this.
Well, that's something that a lot of our generation, it's kind of a shared experience of our generation. And I never looked up like what age Becky is, but just seeing some pictures, I think she's probably about our age. She's probably in her early mid-30s, I would assume. And yeah, we grew up being told like, you know, you go to school when you leave school, at least as, you know, middle class, lower middle class, from lower middle class, you know, white suburban families, both you and I fall into that class. I don't like the word class, but that's the one I'm using for right now, for lack of a better word. Besides the point. But like our experience was go to school, apply to college, go to college, figure out what you want to do, and then get a career and work for a company for 20 to 30 years until you retire, because that's what our parents did. And then we ended our childhood and our teen years with the advent of social media and the advent of positions based online, and with all of this new technology that evolved so rapidly, And just like we kind of realized that like that's not how it has to be.
Exactly.
And because of the internet, there were movements of people our age basically saying like there are ways to live differently. This is how I did it. And you can do it too, kind of thing.
Right. There was something I actually saw a few days ago that said that the normal life goals for our parents were, own a house, go to college,
you're a Canadian,
get a car,
own a house.
But it's like all of those that they're not for us because, one, can't afford a house. Two, probably can't afford to retire, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So we're creating our own life goals, which, the person on the post, because it was a Twitter post, the person mentioned was like being happy with yourself or getting over your childhood trauma. And the person said, you also realize how previous generations never did that.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's interesting that you bring that up because that's a really good point. It's like every generation has its own definition of living.
And of what success is. And I think a lot of our generation does not define the job you have and the amount of money you make by success, but kind of like how well are you able to adapt in this current climate and economy and world,
Climate of existence.
Right.
Two things like I actually looked up because Becky Chambers is 38, so she is our age.
Okay, so a few years older, but about our age. Yeah, same generation.
And I also wanted to read something that I found on Google that was because it labeled two genres she works in. The first was solar punk. The second one, I'll just read the definition. So credit to Google or Wikipedia. Hope punk is a subgenre of speculative fiction conceived of as the opposite of grimdark. Works in the hope punk genre are about characters fighting for positive change, radical kindness, and communal responses to challenges.
Mm-hmm. It's that kind of liberalism from the 70s that a lot of people hated.
Yep.
It's just like happy-go-lucky.
Well, the book didn't feel like all hippie. Like it didn't feel like that.
It didn't at all.
That's
why it's so brilliant, I think. I
know. It's like, this is just the way it exists. And you read it and like how you said, like you would think that without a plot, the story would be like, oh, this is fine doing it. But instead it's like, I mean, I read slow, everyone. I read very slow. I read this in like 2 days. Even though it's short, I read it in 2 days because it was just so compelling.
Yeah. And it has these absolutely wonderful, heartfelt moments.
Yes.
Like, and they're so simple. Again, it's about like finding the simple things in life to make you happy. It was the idea of Moscat being like, I've never held someone's hand before. Can I hold your hand? And Sibling Dex saying yes. And even though its hand was much bigger than theirs, it seemed to fit and it felt good. I mean, something so simple as that in most books, would just be another passing moment is, there's a lot more weight to something like that in this book. Yeah.
Yes. And that's the other thing. There's no like tragedy in this book, if you will.
No.
Like how a lot of sympathy for characters is created because it's like, oh, your parents died or, oh, your hometown was burned down or something. There isn't any of that. There's just that wanting to connect as a human.
Yeah, the most there is when they're going around as a T-monk and people are telling them about like the tragedies that are in their lives. But it's in passing like that. And the point is for Sibling Dex to be there for them.
Right.
And to spend 5-10 minutes wholly devoted to helping that person not even necessarily feel better, just to be there for them and to comfort them in whatever the way they need, whether it's a cup of tea, whether it's to chat, or whether it's just to sit there.
Right. Because as I've read several times, and it is very true, sometimes the best thing you could do for someone who's in pain is to just sit with them.
Just be there.
And it's just like you said with the hand holding thing. Yeah, it's like, it's just such a simple thing. But then to a lot of people, again, we want to talk about millennials, even Gen Z, it's like generations are gradually getting lonelier and lonelier because of social media, because of COVID, because of work because of all this. It's like we're becoming gradually more isolated. And like I mentioned earlier, humans are inherently social.
Right.
So it's that idea of just, holding someone's hand for a few minutes or just like getting a hug. It's like that could mean a mountain of importance to someone.
Right. Yeah.
Agreed.
Wholeheartedly.
This book understands that completely.
Yeah, and I know so much of what we've been talking about has been kind of about like rejecting modernism, and there are all of these themes and in the novel,
embrace
but like
tradition.
Yeah, but if you really just if you just read the book casually and you're not looking to have to talk about it for an hour on a podcast like we did, it really is like it's just a feel good book. It just makes you feel good. And that's not something you find in literature that much anymore. I don't
even
think.
Then, for this hour, we talked about the book for probably about like 20 to 30 minutes. We were talking more about the ideas of the book and how it made us feel.
Right.
Too, which is the goal.
For such a small book that doesn't like... if you're someone who's maybe not as familiar with some of these themes and concepts, it may feel like you're being beat over the head with them. But I didn't at all.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
It just felt so natural to me, and it was like a breath of fresh air that it was written like it was something natural, and it wasn't something edgy or the fact that it was pushing against something were ideas that came to me while I was reading it, not that was being explicitly stated by the author.
Right. Even then, like I like how you mentioned, like it felt like you were beating over the head a little bit. I didn't feel that. Yes, there were long passages of dialogue, but it never felt too indulgent or too...
I think there is a bit more of it maybe in A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, but I think a lot of that is because there are so many different alien species. That and there's just like so much. I think that's part of it too. It's like in that book, there's a lot of open conversation about sexuality and about friendship and community and politics and things like that you don't necessarily get in a lot of books. A lot of books you'll be given an opinion about something or someone, but in her way of writing, it's conversational. It's like when you and I talk, it's a push and pull. Someone puts up an idea and someone else says, well, no, why? Why wouldn't you do this? And they go, well, I do it this way, but why do you do it that way?
Right. And she's not making the decision for you. She's letting you make the decision while showing you like, look, this is kind of right. This is the evidence. This is what it should go for,
Yeah, like there's a I don't remember the name of the character, but it's kind of she's like a reptilian character in A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And her, if I remember correctly, her species, they copulate as friends. Like if they become close to someone, they copulate, and it's because they're close and they're friends, but there's not necessarily like romanticism or attachment or something with it. That's just like, oh, we're friends, like let's make each other happy. And the main character thinks that's like really weird and bizarre. But I think the idea is like there are people like that, and there's nothing wrong with it. They're not doing anything to hurt you. They're not bothering you. That's just how it is. But to the reptilian species perspective, it's like, well, if I have friends, like, of course I'm going to tell them I love them. And there's also these ideas that come in about family and how blood doesn't necessarily mean family, how family is who you choose to surround yourself with. So it's just these ideas that, it's this talking back and forth of ideas, and, it's okay to have differing ideas, and it's okay to not do things the same way that others do. You just have to understand that other people do things differently than you.
Right. Just like I said before about the cultural differences, it's once you leave your little sphere, you have to be ready to embrace that other people, they're going to do things differently. It's not wrong.
Right.
It might even be better, but it's like,
yeah.
That's
and then
just how things are.
And then it's up to you, whether you want to follow in those footsteps or continue doing what you're doing. Just don't be a dick.
That's the essence of this book. Don't be an asshole.
Right? Like,
yeah.
That's what it comes down to. And
we're stronger together, just like how you were saying, like, everything can be shared. Like, you don't have to go through things alone.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot where I was going with this. Fuck.
It's you this episode. It hasn't happened to me. Well, it happened to me once, but it's happened to you more.
It was about like togetherness. Oh. Oh, wait. Yeah, now I remember. Because it's like because I always think like, okay, dogs, when you mix breeds, they become stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that whole idea of purity, like with people, like royals or whatever, the white nationalists, I guess, like, like purity. We want purity.
Yeah.
But actually, in a biological sense, mixing is stronger because you get the dominant genes. And to me, I think that carries over to culture as well. It's like when you start to mix and you see like, oh, well, burritos are really good. They're not a white invention, but burritos are amazing. They're filling, they're healthy. I like burritos, everyone. And I had Chipotle yesterday.
There you go. Relating to the proper things.
Right. But it's like you carry that into your culture. It strengthens you literally, and you pass it on to your kids, and you start to get this amalgamation of everything. So it's like, it shows that our strength is in sharing and bonding, not in you stay there.
Yeah. And just kind of like breaking down the divisional ties and like accepting that people are different and being okay with it and not marginalizing those differences, but talking about those differences, celebrating the differences. It's I think sometimes people think with other cultures and other people that because of stereotypes, there are certain things you like shouldn't talk about or bring up. But I always found that was weird because like, obviously I don't agree with the vast majority of stereotypes, but stereotypes they're there for a reason. They exist. But it's just like, but celebrate them. They don't have to be a reason to put someone down. They can be a reason to open up a dialogue and a conversation and go, oh, well, from my experience in my life so far, this is all I know. Enlighten me, either tell me why it's right or why you think it's wrong, And
I've had that conversation with people, not in that exact regard, but like, look, I want to learn. And it's like this light goes off on their face. Like, oh, you're actually legit. You actually are curious. And it's like this wonderful moment.
Yeah. Hey there, just wanted to update everyone about some changes we've made to our YouTube and Patreon channels. I'm excited to announce that the Story Weavers video podcast is now available to everyone on YouTube. As of today, you can see our beautiful faces on all episodes, including this one. We've also updated our options for Patreon subscribers to include viewing the live recordings of episodes, Q&A sessions with John and myself, as well as the option to join our Discord for Hangouts. Enjoy the Story Weavers video podcast now at youtube.com/@StoryWeaversPodcast and on Patreon at patreon.com/StoryWeaversPodcast. Our goal is to keep this podcast ad-free and uninterrupted. Thanks again to all of our listeners and supporters. Now back to the episode. Why don't you close it out since I opened?
Sounds good. We're done, everyone. Get out. So that brings us to the end of our conversation about this month's Book of the Month, A Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers. We hope everyone enjoyed this episode, and we hope if you participated that you enjoyed reading the book. I know I myself will be reading the second book soon, hopefully, but it is on my list.
Yep.
And I definitely want to check out her other series. Just a fantastic author. And I love what she's done. So, thank you for listening, and hope you tune in next time. If you're not already, if you want to, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, whatever platform of your preference. You'll be notified about our latest episodes. And if you want, we do have a Patreon page. If that interests you, you could check it out. The link is in the description. And you can check out the different tiers if you wish to subscribe and support our podcast further. So, in conclusion, we are your Story Weavers, John Worth.
And Dean Bradley. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll take a nod from Becky. Thank you for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time.
On Story Weavers. Thank you for listening to this episode of Story Weavers. As ever, we're incredibly grateful to all of our listeners and contributors. Come back next week for the next installment of Story Weavers.